Hello there, everyone. This is Aaron St. Dennis, the FF Mad Scientist, and this is the Mad Science Lab podcast. Today, we're continuing on with the Studs and Duds series. Can't talk. That's how you can tell I've done too many of these today. Studs and Duds with Ryan, also known as What Gibbs FF on Twitter. Ryan, thanks for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, man, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about some two guys that I love, two guys I'm a little bit down on, and appreciate you having me on the show. I've been a longtime follower of your stuff, so happy to be here.
Thanks, man. It's great to have you. I can't talk today. Jesus, need to get me a drink of water. While I do that, would you like to tell everyone where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely come find me on Twitter at whatgibbsff. I also do some charity work on Twitter. Announced or did this initiative called Announce the Pick, and we actually had like Matthew Berry get involved and a couple other people over the years. And basically, what it does is it connects fantasy fans, with their favorite analysts or sometimes NFL players, and we get them to do short little 20, 30-second video announcements of people making picks. Great to do when you're doing a slow draft or like maybe a slow rookie draft like this time of year. And in exchange, we do it for a small monetary donation to a charity of the announcer's choice. So
Awesome.
definitely come check me out on Twitter if any interest, and would love to drive more money to some great charities we've been working with over the years.
That's awesome. I was having this conversation the other day with a buddy at my full time job in real life, and I was saying how I'm in so many charity leagues, the FF7s and Scott Fishbowl, and then what else did I do last week? Fantasy Cares Eliminator, the Warrior Bowl. I'm sitting there, I'm going, I'm losing track of all my donations, and my buddy, not missing a beat, pointed out that technically isn't every league I play in just a donation anyways, so it's all charity. So valid point. I guess it's always just a donation when I play. All right, well, let's get into some real football here. Pretend we know what we're talking about. We've got Chargers quarterback Justin Herbert, who is your stud. Uh, Finished as QB 11 last year, struggled with injuries, 147 rushing yards, 4,739 passing yards, 25 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 393.51. Ooh, I almost had PPR points, but that doesn't matter. He's a quarterback. 17.07 points per game. Fantasy Pros currently has him 45th overall. He is 42nd overall on NFC, currently going as QB6. Why is he your stud?
So for me, it's funny talking about someone in his tier as a stud because it's almost like, duh, obviously Justin Herbert's great. But where I find he's being a little bit underrated is I think people are expecting, I don't know if they're expecting the 25 touchdowns from last year to still play. But like you said, he dealt with rib and shoulder injuries, still put up great numbers. But two of the big additions that make me really like Justin Herbert from this year are one, the drafting of Quentin Johnston. I feel like he is a perfect fit for what Justin Herbert does well. You got Mike Williams, that's a great field stretcher. You got Keenan Allen, who's still at his age one of the best route runners in the NFL. Quentin Johnston gives him a little bit of an in between of those two guys where he can stretch the field very well. Definitely an explosive vertical threat. And I think with Kellen Moore coming over, he likes to use a lot of those downfield throws. I think we've seen guys like Amari Cooper have success, CeeDee Lamb have success with Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator. So I like those additions. And I think also where Quentin Johnston does really well is yards after the catch. And with the way that Justin Herbert and that offense has the potential to like do those short dump off passes where he's also very proficient, Justin Herbert, I think it's going to open up a lot of opportunity there. And I think if you look, like they didn't have that many games last year. I think it was 7 games where both Mike Williams and Keenan Allen were on the field at the same time last year. So they needed that extra weapon in case people aren't healthy. But now you add in Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Quentin Johnston. They still have Joshua Palmer, Austin Eckler, obviously out of the backfield. I just feel like he should be in that top tier still, in that top
Yeah.
3 or 4 discussion for fantasy purposes. But people are talking about him more in the tier 2 right below. And Usually I've been seeing him around like 7, 8, even a little bit lower. Fantasy Pros has him at 7, behind Justin Fields, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts. I think he's absolutely in the conversation with those guys and just flying a little bit under the radar.
Yeah, NFC has him at 6. I think I have him as anywhere between 4 and 5. I normally leave Mahomes, Allen, Hurts alone. For me, it's a coin flip. I kind of diversify between him and Burrow, but I think they're easily tier two by themselves. And then the group of Lamar, Lawrence, Fields is probably tier 3 for me. So I think, yeah, he's not massively undervalued, but I pretty confidently have him as 4 or 5 in a tier all to themselves there with Burrow. I think I might slightly prefer Burrow, but just looking here, the average ADP here for Burrow's 26 overall. Herbert goes 42. So if you're telling me I can add in an additional second or third round stud here at wide receiver or running back, and then just take Herbert around later, I feel like I'm going to have a wide variety of exposure to Herbert this year. I like that. I think. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and the other piece is too. I totally agree with that. I think that's a great point of like looking at him and Burrow ADP wise, because I think they're very similar to me. I don't see that big kind of 1.5, 2 round difference between the two players. So I think that's definitely a great strategy. Beef up on your running back, wide receiver, and those elite tiers that you can still get there, and then settle for someone. And I say settle loosely for someone like Herbert, but what I really like about Justin Herbert too is the consistency. So I sometimes play around with some stats and I'll like remove players' top 3 games from their totals, and then I'll look at the averages that they put forward and like what kind of percentage of a decline would he have if you did that. And the elite guys like Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts that we talked about, they're under 10%. That's exactly where you're finding Justin Herbert as well. So it's not like there's a lot of volatility. Guys like Justin Fields, for instance, who's going before him, and I know he's got that rushing upside, but you start to see that like 20% dip in average stats once you remove those top 3 games, and that's because again they're more reliant on their feet. Same thing with Lamar Jackson; it's like even 25% with him. So it's just interesting if you're looking for that consistency for your team. I tend to like that out of the quarterback position, so that's why I'm kind of viewing him as that stud.
I'm definitely going to be buying a lot of the injury dip this year. Moving on, your next stud, we have San Francisco wide receiver Brandon Ayuk, finished as wide receiver 15, 23 rushing yards, 1,015 receiving, 8 touchdowns, 209.8 full PPR points, good for 13.4 per game, 66 overall in ADP on Fantasy Pros. I can find him pretty quickly here on NFC because this range is someone range I've talked about a lot. He's 67 on NFC, wide receiver 32, and I don't know how many shows I've said this on, but I'm going to skip the card here and we'll go right to the ADP because I've said this millions of times. I love this little trio here of Lockett, Deontay, and Ayuk in 65, 66, 67 here. And I've never been the Ayuk guy or the Deontay guy or the Lockett guy. But if you tell me I can have Brandon Ayuk at 67 overall instead of Debo at 36, 37 overall, good God, why is anyone drafting Debo at 36? I don't understand it. What are your thoughts here?
Absolutely, I 100% agree, and I think when it comes to Ayuk, you saw 2 pretty big statistics for him as career best last year: 22.6% target share, 1.91 yards per route run. I expect you see a regression in George Kittle touchdowns this year, which I think could open up more. And I just think you're starting to see that shift to
Yeah.
me when I was watching San Fran towards the end of the year, where he seemed like he was becoming the number one, and Ayuk was more a little bit, manufactured plays for him. And I just feel like when you look, like you said, that range of where he's going, that value is just like a smash to me. Even in dynasty rankings, like Jordan Addison, Jerry Jeudy, Michael Pittman, Christian Watson, DJ Moore, Chris Godwin, JSN. Those are the names ahead of him. I'm okay with JSN being there, but like those other guys, you could make a very strong case for Ayuk being better than them. And even when you look at redrafts, I think he was something like 32 in redraft I saw. And I'm just like, I feel like it's just such a smash value to me when it comes to Ayuk. Again, I know they have a lot of weapons in San Francisco, but that target share, even with all those weapons, and I think it started to increase as the year went on, even with CMC there. I just think that, to me, that is a little bit of a quarterback proof situation where it doesn't matter who starts there. I think they're going to really leverage IU quite a bit in that offense. So I think based off of where he's going, I love the value there.
I agree with what you said so much. You've prompted me to pull out my phone, and I'm attempting to trade for Ayuk in my dynasty league, my dynasty league of record. So we'll see how that goes. You've inspired me a bit, but I agreed. Like I said, this has kind of been my drumbeat all off season here. I love this group. Lockett, Deontay, Ayuk. They're just so undervalued. I don't normally like this range here. Like I said, 15 DK, that seems where it goes from the elite group here. Then there's a massive cliff into this range, but from 16 to about 35, it gets real messy. And my favorites seem to be 30, 31, 32. And then even if I don't like those, like once you get a little further down, I'm taking the young guys with upside. I don't know. I I love Ayuk in this range, and I'm not even the Ayuk guy. I can't see why anyone would take Debo over him at twice the price. Excuse me, just doesn't make any sense.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And I think that's why, and it's funny you say that, because even coming out of college, like I had a second round grade on Ayuk, a high second round grade. I liked him. I've never been the biggest Ayuk guy, but I just feel like
Yeah.
with the value, that's one that's standing out to me. And then just I'll hit real quick, just while we're talking the position and those ranges. I do think that Terry McLaurin and DJ Moore are kind of interesting guys in that range. I know they're a little bit above him in that like early 20s to mid 20s range.
Who
But
was it? Sorry, DJ Moore?
DJ Moore and Terry McLaurin, and
Yeah, they're
what's
23, 24.
and I think that's kind of appropriate. But I think people start to forget about them because their quarterback play over the last couple of seasons have just been so bad that McLaurin's posted 3 straight 1,000 yards seasons. He's had limited touchdown upside with his poor quarterback play that he's had. I think he's posted 4, 5, and 5 in the last 3 years. But he had 8 different quarterbacks under center in that stretch, and I think Eric Bieniemy coming in that offense and maybe some stability with Sam Howell helps. And then with DJ Moore, again, 3 straight 1,100-yard seasons playing with Kyle Allen, Cam Newton, Will Greer, Teddy Bridgewater, PJ Walker, Sam Darnold. Like, it's been a mess there too. All of those guys under 60% completion rates. Like, him going to Chicago, McLaurin getting Bieniemy, and Howell, I feel like those guys are also pretty decent value too.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. Like I said, it's kind of an interesting range. I'm a little bit all over the place there. There's a few guys. Like I said, the main takeaway from this portion, it's not necessarily who I am targeting, it's the avoids. Debo is a huge avoid for me. Calvin Ridley at 43 when you can have Kirk at 53. There's a few huge landmines, and I don't know why anyone hasn't caught on. But we'll move on next. We have Kansas City running back Isaiah Pacheco, finished as RB37 last year. 830 rushing yards, 130 through the air, 5 touchdowns, 169.88 full PPR points, good for 7.82 per game. Fantasy Pros ADP of 79 overall. Going to try and find him here quickly. Pacheco is 79 overall on NFC, going as RB28. Is he a stud or a dud for you? I think he's your dud.
He is, and it's not that I don't. It's again like there's a couple guys in that range, like Alvin Kamara,
Yeah, let
Dalvin
me
Cook,
just let
James
me
Cook.
actually. I'm gonna bring that up because I was agreeing with you 100% that I don't like him at all, and then I brought up this range, and I was like, oh, woof, maybe I like him more than I thought. Because like, look at this range. I don't have Pacheco anywhere, but like Javante, I think is gonna be hurt. I like Montgomery, but like Cook, Gibson, Kamara is probably suspended. Dylan, like, woof. Once he feels like a cliff here. Him and Montgomery are the last of a tier, I think, and then it goes ugh. So
Yeah, it
sorry to
gets
interrupt.
really ugly fast. It does, it does. But I think like with Pacheco, I'm seeing him. I know this is what it's showing here in some of my drafts. I'm seeing. I'm getting a lot of overdrafts with him. People
Yep.
kind of taking him in that like early 20s range. And I think it's because he started to take over that job in the playoffs. Um, but if you look at even weeks 11 through 17, highest PPR points per game was 16.2. That's not really moving the needle too much as your what would be maybe your RB2 or your high end RB3 in that range. Then if you look in the playoffs, like he became the every down back for them more so than he was during the season. They were giving him more touches, and he still only topped out at 13.6 as his highest PPR total in the playoffs. So I think with Bieniemy leaving, I think he becomes a little bit of that. Does he regress a little bit on a usage perspective? They still have McKinnon. They still have Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who I know has been a big disappointment there. But I just think Bieniemy was the one that really liked his skill set. And I think you see that replicated in Washington when they drafted Chris Rodriguez. So I think Bieniemy's trying to do what he was doing with Pacheco and KC with Washington with Rodriguez. So I kind of almost like Rodriguez is a little bit of a sleeper because he seems to be the coordinator's guy over there, even though they have Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson still. But Pacheco, just like I said, where I've been seeing him in actual drafts that I'm in, just seems to be a little bit of an overdraft. Like I said, Dalvin Cook's been going behind him in a lot of drafts that I'm seeing, and I know there's uncertainty where he lands. But if you had a Dalvin Cook or Isaiah Pacheco head to head, for me, it's not even a question that I'm taking Dalvin Cook.
Yeah, I think the moral of this story is it gets ugly real quick, and for the most part, avoid these running backs. Like I get there's going to be some zero RB builds where you're going to be forced, but ugh, I hope by the time I get down to this range of running backs, already got a couple on my team because it is ugly and full of uncertainty. Yeah.
100%.
Alrighty, let's bring up your last guy here if I can get to it. We have Tampa Bay wide receiver Mike Evans. Last year, 1,124 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns, 219.4 full PPR points, good for 15.03 per game, was wide receiver 17. Fantasy Pros ADP has him at 72 overall. He is currently where is he? 73 overall, wide receiver 33, one after Brandon Ayuk on NFC. Why are you out on Evans?
So Evans, I mean, if you look at his last season, he had two monster games, right? I think in week 17 he put up
42
48,
pointers, yeah.
48 if it's PPR, 48
After
7.
everyone was already eliminated if you rostered him, so that was helpful.
Exactly. And then he had that one early game in the season where he had a little bit over 30 points. But with Mike Evans, it comes down to, and I told you like earlier in the show with the quarterbacks, I do like to look at like, okay, if I remove the top games, what kind of consistency am I getting here? That's someone who dropped 29% in points per game when you remove those top couple games, which definitely shows that lack of consistency. So for me, you take those out, 10.65 points per game on a PPR basis. You have a massive quarterback question. You got a guy coming into his age 30 season who has had a history, especially early on in his career, with those hamstring problems. That's where you start to get those like consistent hamstring issues, right? Like the Julio Jones kind of guys that we've seen fall off. So his lack of consistency, that one big game in week 17, the massive questions at quarterback with Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask, whoever takes over that job. He's definitely a guy that I'm almost completely out on. I won't probably roster him anywhere. And I used to be a really big Mike Evans guy.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. Like I said, this group or this range, I like the guys that are with him over him. It's for me, it comes down to one thing. Not only it's the quarterback question marks, but I think the quarterback, whoever it is, will affect him much more than it will affect Chris Godwin. So we see Godwin goes about what's that? About a round and a half before. If I'm compelled to draft one of them, I'd either take Godwin at 58, or I just, like I said, I'd take the Lockett, Deontay, Ayuk range, 2 or 3 picks ahead of him. If he was all that was left, I would simply, I brought the ADP up. Okay, yeah, I did. If I was compelled to draft a wide receiver in this range, I would just pass and I would take a guy like Burks, Pickens, Dotson, Addison, JSN, some young guys with some upside. I just don't see any scenario where I'm going to be using the 73rd, 74th overall pick for Mike Evans, who I think is limited at best at this point in his career.
Yeah, and it just goes back to that Brandon Ayuk thing too. Like the fact that he's one slot ahead of
Yep.
Mike Evans is absolutely wild to me.
Yeah.
Like absolutely wild.
100%. All right, Ryan. Well, thank you for joining me. That concludes our studs and duds. You want
Thanks
to
for
take
having
one
me.
more chance here to tell everyone where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Please find me on Twitter at whatgibbsff. Gibbs like Joe Gibbs. Big Washington Commanders fan, but love fantasy football community. I've been playing since 1995. I was a fifth grader playing fantasy football, so this is my passion. So definitely come interact, and would love to chat with people over there.
This isn't even where I started. I was fantasy hockey. I
Ah,
really only I only took, like, I always played fantasy football, but I did, like, fantasy hockey was my thing. I only really got into it in 2020 when COVID shut down the NHL for the most part. And then when
right.
we came back after that, most of my fantasy hockey leagues just weren't going anymore. They all died during COVID. And that's when I got into fantasy football full time. And apparently that's where I am now. So,
Well, hey man,
um,
if you ever need a extra for a fantasy hockey league, I've used to love fantasy hockey too. Fell out because I just feel like the popularity is not there. It wasn't enough interest of people that I know. So hit me up if you ever got a league. I'm
fantasy
definitely interested.
hockey, my family fantasy hockey league was my favorite of any fantasy league of all time for one reason. It's the only league I ever did in any sport that was a live draft. If any football league gets a live draft together, I will join it even if I don't know the people. That's the best part of any league, is the live draft. But
Absolutely, I miss that, man. That used to be
me
the
too.
norm, and now it's the rarity.
Well, because nowadays I play with so many people I've never met, and like they live on different sides of the world, that it's just not possible. But even my work league, it's like we try to do it. It's a 14 team league. We'll end up trying to put something together, and it ends up being like 6 of the people are there live, and everyone else is at home. So
Right.
don't understand it. But this has been Studs and Duds with What Gibbs FF. Once again, I am Aaron St. Dennis, the FF Mad Scientist, and this has been the Mad Science Lab podcast. Thank you to Ryan for joining me, and thank you everyone for watching. Take care.